So what happens when a business deal literally sinks to the bottom of the sea? Well, today we're going to dive into a landmark court case that started with exactly that, a total disaster. And you'll be surprised at how much it still affects, how pretty much everything gets shipped around the world. Let's get right into it.
Think about this for a second. When does a shipping company actually become responsible for your stuff? Is it the moment you hand it over at the counter? The second it's on the truck? Or only when you get that little shipped notification on your phone? It sounds simple, right? But in the world of global commerce, that one question is worth millions, maybe billions, every single day. Well, the answer to that very modern problem, believe it or not, comes from a case that was decided way back in 1964. We're going to break down this Supreme Court decision, Compania Maritima versus the Insurance Company of North America. It's a fantastic story about a sunken barge, a whole lot of hemp, and a legal fight for the ages. All right, so first things first, let's set the scene with the deal itself and the disaster that wasn't far behind. What exactly happened to kick off this whole legal mess? Okay, so picture this. It's October 1952. It all starts with a simple phone call. A company, McLeod, needs to ship a huge amount of hemp. So they hire a carrier, Compania Maritima. On the morning of October 29th, the carrier sends two smaller boats, they're called lighters or barges, to pick up all this cargo. By evening, the barges are loaded and they're moved over to a government wharf, just waiting for the main ship to arrive. But then, in the middle of the night, disaster strikes. One of them, LCT 1025, just sinks, and more than 1,000 bales of hemp go right down with it. And this was no small loss. We're talking over 60,000 pesos when you add up the value of the cargo and the cost to salvage what they could. That was a ton of money back in 1952. And of course, this led to the million-dollar question. Well, the 60,000 peso question. Who's paying for this? Well, lucky for the shipper, McLeod, they had insurance. Their insurer paid out the claim, no problem. But, the story doesn't stop there. The insurance company then turned right around and sued the shipping carrier, Compania Maritima. They basically said, hey, this was your fault. We paid our client. Now you have to pay us. And that lawsuit is what this is all about.
Now, you can bet Compania Maritima wasn't just going to roll over and write a check. Nope. They showed up to court armed with a whole list of reasons why this wasn't their fault at all.
Their whole defense came down to 5 main points. First, they claimed a contract hadn't even officially started yet. Second, they argued the sinking was an act of God. And then they threw in a few technical legal arguments, things like the insurance company had no right to sue in the first place or that the loss wasn't proven correctly. So, let's see how the Supreme Court took these on one by one. So, the case makes its way all the way to the highest court in the land. And this is where it gets really good. Let's look at how the justices just completely dismantled the carrier's arguments. Okay, the first big argument, and probably their strongest one, was this idea that, legally speaking, the job hadn't even begun. They argued that because the hemp wasn't on the main ship and because no official bill of lading, that's the official shipping receipt, had been issued, there was no valid contract. Simple as that. To sort this out, the court first had to get back to basics. What even is a contract of carriage? And it's not really about the paper. It's a legal agreement that begins the very moment a carrier takes physical possession and control of your stuff with the plan to move it. I love this slide because it shows the clash perfectly. The carrier was focused on the end of the process, getting it on the big ship, getting the paperwork done. But the court? They looked at the very beginning. They said, look, those barges were just stand-ins for the main ship. The moment your employees put that hemp on your boat, you took control. The contract started right then and there. And the court didn't mince words. Their ruling was crystal clear. They basically said liability starts with actual delivery. The formal bill of lading, not necessary to get the ball rolling. In other words, what you do matters more than the paperwork you haven't filled out yet. And just like that, defense number 1, gone. Okay, so the court says there was a contract. What's the carrier's next move? They try to argue that even if there was a contract, they still weren't responsible because the sinking was caused by something totally beyond their control, a force of nature. So the carrier claimed this crazy, powerful storm rolled in and sank their barge. But the facts? Yeah, they told a completely different story. The evidence showed winds were only blowing at about 11 miles per hour. That's a nice breeze, not a storm. And even worse, a marine surveyor's report showed the barge itself was a mess. It had cracks in the bottom, compartments that weren't watertight. It was absolutely not seaworthy.
So the court's conclusion was pretty blunt. They said this wasn't an act of God or force majeure. It was a lack of adequate precaution. It was pure negligence. You can't send a leaky boat out to do a job and then blame the weather when it sinks. And with that, defense number 2 was also toast.
That just leaves those last 3 technical arguments the carrier tried to make. And honestly, the court dealt with these pretty quickly.
First, the court said the insurance company absolutely had the right to sue, thanks to a legal idea called subrogation. We'll get to that in a sec. Second, they said the financial proof for the 60,000 peso loss was totally fine. And finally, in a kind of embarrassing moment for the carrier, their own lawyer had to admit in court that, yeah, the insurance company was a legal entity and could operate in the country. So those last 3 arguments just fell apart.
Let's just pause on that word, subrogation. It sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It means the insurer, after they pay a claim, gets to step into the shoes of the person they paid. So the insurance company inherited McLeod's right to go after the carrier that caused all the damage. It's a really important rule that lets insurers hold the people who are actually at fault accountable.
So a shipping company was found liable for some lost cargo on a leaky boat more than half a century ago. Big deal, right? Well, yeah, it's a huge deal, because the principles hammered out in this case are basically the foundation of modern logistics. When you boil it all down, this case leaves us with 4 huge takeaways. 1. Responsibility starts with control, not paperwork. 2. All the little preparatory steps are part of the bigger deal. 3. You can't blame an act of God when it's really your own fault. And 4. Subrogation makes sure the buck stops with the person who's actually responsible. I mean, think about it. These ideas are the invisible glue holding together everything from massive cargo ships crossing the ocean to the delivery van bringing a package to your front door. It's the system of trust and accountability that lets our entire global supply chain even function.
So next time you track a package online, just remember that sunken barge full of hemp. The rules that were set in stone in that courtroom back in 1964 are the reason you can trust that your package is going to get where it's going. It's the invisible foundation that makes so much of our modern life possible. Pretty cool, right? I hope this explainer gave you some good food for thought.